All right, we're back in edit. Pastor and Professor, last time we left, we talked about the black female role in the civil rights movement, and as far as, you know, they definitely doing the work and should have had the prestige of the general, but they more so were posited as grunts. So we're going to jump back in here and see what our black women on panel have to say. So now, black women expound.
Okay, so part of that, doing that work was multifaceted, right? You had on one part women who were actually allowed to participate in the movement, and I say allowed because it was an allowance. It was, you know, on one part, the very essential form of patriarchy and patriarchal ownership in marriages. I don't want my woman out there having to deal with X, Y, Z. But also you have a long historical tradition of black women being activists and fighting for the things that they feel their families, their children, their husbands themselves should have access to. So there's sort of this tension between that, and then for black women who are participating in the movement, they're participating in very specific roles. This is one of the things that we see outside of the civil rights movement with the Black Power movement. We have a lot of records articulating the sexism that African American women encountered in trying to participate and break out of those sex segregated roles. You know, oh, you're a woman, you should type the newsletter. You know, you're a woman, you should do the breakfast program. You're a woman, you need to do something dealing with children. And really get out to do the type of work that would allow them to be alongside men doing work that was seen publicly as just as valuable and just as important. So you have that issue. And then, like I said, you have this long tradition of black women being activists, being the ones to reach out and say something is wrong here, this needs to be fixed. So I think you have those two tensions there.
No, I just said Ida B. You made me think about Ida B. Wells. I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, I definitely agree with that. I think beginning with somebody like Ida B. Wells, who in fact was, and I think we lose sight of these women who aren't ordinary like Ida B. Wells. Ida B. Wells was a public lecturer when women, I mean, again, when promiscuity meant men and women in the same room together, Ida B. Wells was promiscuous in that sense, and she went into these masculine spaces. She was engaged in masculine work, but especially here in Memphis, you know, we nurtured that kind of thing, and dare I say, there was less sexism in certain kinds of ways. Ida B. Wells had her, you know, she was pretty feisty, as it were, so she was able to do some things that other women weren't able to do. But there are more Ida Wellses just, you know, who had similar kinds of positions, and I think we lose sight of them because, again, they get buried as grunts in the history. And again, that's about how we're remembering the women. It's not just that women weren't doing this work; they were doing this work.
Secondary sources.
Yeah, but that work is buried, and we're always discovering. We're always discovering it.
Right.
Like every month, a new book is coming out. Like this woman who we never knew anything about, who was actually very important during her time, and we just need to figure out how to diversify. And I think, you know, revolutionary blackness is blackness that fights against that patriarchy, and that's where we need to be moving to in order to have broader conversations about this.
Yeah, and we're seeing that now. I think Clenora Hudson Weems, who's actually a LeMoyne alumni, is actually in the process of writing. I'm not sure if she's done yet or not, but she's actually doing a book on African American women in the Obama election and presidency.
Right.
So there's definitely that space, and even myself, when my volunteer experiences, there were enormous amounts of women volunteering on the campaign here in Memphis, and in spaces where I would only see a few men. So that activism is still there. It's still very much alive. It's still very much a part of how African American women operate and navigate for their own, you know.
Well, look, I want to shift gears a little bit because it seems as though the consensus is symbolism, to a degree at least, is problematic because it cannot capture the totality and entirety of the nuances of a particular movement. Absolutely. So if that symbolism is problematic, Chuck, give me some of your feedback on the framing historically of King, which is reductionist and shallow, right? And then now it's being compared and contrasted or even coupled with Obama. And so does the symbolism somehow turn itself over or lend itself to the opportunity of these two people actually? I'm scared. Let me frame it like this, try to put it briefly. Preacher trying to put it briefly.
Yeah.
Pray for me.
It's a little late, bro.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
So
Here we
Obama puts his hand on the King Bible.
go. Oh boy.
And my fear is, down the line, that's
burnt
going
up.
that's-
Score no wins.
But my fear is that historically, in 50, 60 years, that's going to be interpreted as some type of what I call it a endorsement of King, of Obama's presidency, absentee ballot post.
We don't have to wait 50, 60 years. You know what happened? You know what happened after? You know what after he did the oath on it? They had him sign King's Bible.
Oh.
You don't have to wait 50 years.
And
That was the day of.
right.
They
So-
had him sign King's Bible.
And so what is that going to do to the legacy of both, who had two completely different conceptual ideals of what it takes to move the country forward?
Wow. Well, I mean, again, this is about the danger of symbols, right? The danger of symbolism. This is about a whole bunch of things, right? And the first thing that comes to mind is just how starved we are for symbols, right? Because King King blocks the sun when it comes to other symbols, right? We've got so precious few other symbols that we can lay claim to, that we have access to. So when we think of African American political mobilization, when we think of African American empowerment, when we think of the trajectory of the Black freedom struggle from 1619 to 2008, right? There's like 5 people that come to mind, right? And again, we've got the we look for the general, and again, that's not unique to Black folk. That's all of us, right? In 1492, Columbus sailed the ocean blue, right? Right. Columbus, Washington, Lincoln, we all, everybody's responsible for that, right? So the downside of this then is that we are left with, we are left with these vague, nebulous notions of what, of a bunch of things, right? Of what social change looks like, of what leadership looks like, right? Of what, of reality, right? And so we arrive at a point where, Barack Obama places his hand on Martin Luther King's Bible. There's this symbolic, this sort of symbolic convergence, right? And again, this reductionist reasoning, right? That the object of the game for the civil rights movement was for us to get a Black president, right? And now, woo, we've won, right? Everybody gets a Snickers bar now, or whatever, right? Because we get the Scooby snack now because we got a Black president, right? And so that we saw this train wreck coming, right? I mean, anybody who knew once he got the nomination, it was over, right? And we knew this was going to happen. And also, let's be upfront about the fact that this was one of the things that they were very skillful. The Obama campaign was very skillful at sort of manipulating, right? I mean, this was all about, hey, you know what? I'm not going to explicitly talk about, but I am going to heavily intimate here, repeatedly, right? That this is the next progression in the dream, right? This is something that's supposed to happen. This is a natural progression. Right, and so that was woven into the fabric of the campaign, right, and it was explicit as well as implied, right, and people grabbed onto that. We were thirsty for that. We wanted that to be the case, right. So again, what we've done is we've reduced these two things, right. We've reduced what a president is and what a president does, and we've also reduced, or we continue to reduce, who King was and what he represented,
what a
and the
prophet
forces,
is.
right? And really quickly, and the forces that he stood against, right? When King dies in 1968, he's persona non grata at the White House, right? Lyndon Johnson will not take his calls because he has pissed on the Vietnam War and the war on poverty. Right? We're going to put a man on the moon. He says that's ridiculous. We got people starving in the streets, and we want to put a man on the moon. That doesn't make any sense to me, right? We've completely forgotten that king. Right, so so it's very easy to sort of stack these two symbols on top of one another.
Just to mention, and we're going to jump in. Everybody jump in on this one. Earle just mentioned, we all, like when we were at the Rhodes panel you guys were on, we're looking at a prophet versus a politician. But I want to deal with you brought up April 1968, right? It's ironic that why wouldn't they do the King Bible thing the first time around instead of the second time around? And then even above that, I want us to discuss, you know, everybody says it was such a profound thing in 2000, and it really was for the most part. So you look, I want us to juxtapose the profundity of the assassination of King, what that meant to blacks, the positive or negative effect it could have had, versus the election of Obama in the fall of 2008.
Let me jump in, weigh in on that first, because I was
both.
there.
Yeah.
I want some of both of these because I was there. I was coming back from Bangkok, Thailand. I was on R&R, a week's R&R. That means rest and relaxation for those of you who've never been in a war. And we got back from Bangkok on a Sunday afternoon. I believe I can't remember what day it was, but anyway, I saw bodies laying down on the ground on the base, and folk with their heads bust open and bleeding and everything. And I thought we had got attacked. And so I told my friend Nelson, I said, man, let's make it to headquarters and see what was happening. And he said, Gerald, he said, something's wrong. He called me Sergeant. He said, Sergeant, something wrong. And he said, I said, what's wrong? He said, everybody that's hurt white. And I said, what? He said, and so I looked, and everybody that was hurt was white. And I said, what's happening? I know the Viet Cong ain't just killing white folks. And we saw a soul brother, and I'm talking about the effect of King's assassination he did on the people. And a black man, a black soldier was running, and he said, hey, soul brother, he said, y'all just getting in town, get to the base. We said, yeah, we've been on the R&R. We said, what's happening? He said, man, Dr. King just got assassinated, and we tearing this mother up. And they tore it up too. They tore it up. And it was just like a riot. It was a riot on our camp. Nobody talks about that. It was not only riots in the States, but it was riots on the bases in Thailand, Vietnam, Cambodia, everywhere. That's how it was the only way we could respond. We had to do something, and guess what we did, Nelson and myself? We joined in, you know. But that happened there. Now let me talk a little about the difference. As Chuck said, the difference. Dr. King's mission was different. He was people oriented. His mission was different. And see, the profound effect, because you all weren't there. See, coming from being able to ride from the back of the bus to the front, it don't mean much to you all because you weren't there. But to us, of my generation, coming from the back of the bus to the front.
To the White House, that means something.
No, from the back of the bus to the front of the bus.
To the front of the bus, not the White House. I mean, the White House doesn't even matter because
we haven't got there.
Yeah, I got
Man, he's still on the bus.
Yeah.
He's still on the bus.
He fast forward.
No, fast forward. Let's be in this moment. Let's be in this moment.
We're going to take this, we're going to progress with this.
Yeah.
It used to be, you could be on the bus and there was 100 black people at the midway section of the back door until they had a little section like this. One white person sitting up to the front of the bus and all the other seats are empty. But you couldn't go up there. And if you bumped into another person on the black person on the bus, you might have to fight. Because man, don't push me across that line. They tell you, don't push me across that line. They wasn't going across that to the white folks' line. So it was monumental when we were able to freely get on. Do you know how proud we were when you could get on the bus and they give a man your money and sit down in that first seat? Hey man, that was just like going to the moon. And for folk in my generation, see, we needed a black president. Now, all the think tanks, like Chuck said, they knew this, and they planned and picked him for us. But we needed a symbol, because basically, the civil rights movement, we had gotten all what they were willing to give us without a revolution. Now, first of all, who do you think buying all these guns? And why do you think they're buying all these guns? The kind of guns they're buying, somebody's expecting a war.
On soil.
Huh? You don't need, now they're using this hunting thing in our, you don't need a weapon to shoot 60 rounds to kill a deer. One bullet will do that. But I cried when Obama was elected, although I knew they had picked him for us. But we needed a symbolism, and they knew we needed a symbolism, a symbol to show us that we're still gaining ground, although we're losing ground. But this, we got a black president. Never in my wildest dreams did I think we'd get one. But the tragedy about the Obama issue is this: he will not mention the word black. He has never mentioned black since he's been president.
Except for to say, I'm not the president of Black America.
That's right.
Yeah.
But you can't get him to mention the word black.
Zandria, you gonna chime in on something a minute ago?
Yeah, I was just thinking about counterframing, the counterframing that's happening. I thought it was interesting the Saturday Night Live sketch, the cold opening last week with Keenan and with Jay Farrow as Obama and Keenan as King. And
yeah, I saw that.
the two,
It's good.
so on the one side, right, Obama is asking King, King appears to him as a ghost. Obama is asking King, hey, am I living up to your legacy? Yeah. And King's talking about Beyonce. He's like, did you see Beyonce? And but the great thing about that sketch is, well, the great thing about that, the great thing about that sketch though is it pushes us, because we actually, those black people, you're counter reading that, right? If you're watching it and you're counter reading it, what I saw was, yeah, it's a funny sketch, but also the improbability of this conversation. Not just because King is dead, but the improbability that because Obama wouldn't ask him, am I living up to your legacy? Because he knows he's not. Right. And so we have this funny conversation between them where King won't give him an answer. Right? He's talking about Beyonce.
Yeah.
And that's the pacifist in King.
And that's the pacifist in
I ain't gonna dish you straight up.
Right.
It's
that's
just,
a pacifist.
We know what's up.
And I thought that was really smart. I think, and of course we know Keenan and Jay Farrow wrote that sketch, and so I thought that was really, and they're coming from a post-civil rights generation, so I thought that was really punchy counter framing of the King Obama kind of symbolism issue. Then second, I want to go back to the Boondocks.
Yes.
Will you niggas please shut the hell up? Yeah. Yes.
Where
I
King is greatly disappointed.
Where King is very
I'm going to Canada.
Right. Where King
shout out to Aaron Magruder.
Right.
Yes.
Shout out to Aaron Magruder.
Can I ask you a question? This is a statement that we used to hear as blacks were able to move around in society and stuff. We used to hear a lot of this, and black folk took pride in this, because white folk would tell us, you the first person that worked at a bank. You the first, and we'd go around and say, I was the first black cashier at the bank. I was the first black person that did such and such a thing. I was the first black person. I was the first black person that did. I was the first black person that did this. I was the first black supervisor at the post office. I was the first black person that worked. And myself. I almost said me, myself, and I. But I was the first black.
Oh, yeah, Bob.
No, this is true. Now, it sounds silly now. It sounds foolish, but you all weren't there. If you were there, you would have said it too. I was the first black accountant that worked for McLean Trucking. Now, how I got that job, they found the black grunts who work in there and you couldn't be a black road driver. They didn't have no black road driver. All of them was white, because that's where the super money was. And you couldn't be. So they filed a class action suit. And that's how me and most blacks my age got their jobs. And if they had positions, that's how we got them. Not because the boss looked at us and we were doing such a bang-up, marvelous job that he decided, out of the goodness of his heart, to promote us and put us up. All of us had to go through a class action suit.
So are you wondering why are blacks they still do that same
thing?
Every time on television I hear, they're always mentioning the first this. That seems problematic.
I was the first black to work in that office, and they still weren't paying me what they was paying the white guy next to me doing the job. And how I found out I wasn't getting paid right, I was talking to a lady over at Time DC, and she was doing the same job. And we was talking about our salary, and she told me what she was making. I said, no, you don't make that. And she said, yes, I do. I said, no, you don't. She said, yes, I do. I said, no, I don't make that kind of money. You couldn't be making. I couldn't sleep that night, man. I got up the next morning.
So G, let me ask you, can you speak to, because on the one hand you have the legitimacy and authenticity of Pop Joyner's experience, and then at the same time you have the perspective that I think you're about to offer about the problematizing of such.
Right. I mean, it's horrible that in 2013 we are still having first black fill in the blanks. I mean, that's a problem.
Yeah.
We are still having first black whatever, you know, and it's sad. I think it's incredibly problematic because as much as we like to use the example of being the first black as this success, like he's saying, it only comes by forcing someone's hand. It comes as a result of a lawsuit. It comes as a result of a federal directive. It comes as a result of we are going to shut you down or boycott your company or never buy anything from you again if you don't. You know, it comes even as recently as it hadn't even been 20 years since Derek Bell had to step down at Harvard to get them to hire a black female law professor.
Well, sometimes
so I mean, we're still grappling with this,
and sometimes it's pretty complex. So when I think about the first black homecoming queen at University of Mississippi, what had happened was some of these.
This is breaking news.
So this one sorority kept winning the homecoming, and another sorority, white sorority, got really pissed about that. And so instead of backing the candidate who would have been the favored candidate, of course, from the other sorority, everybody rallied behind this black woman. And so then, kind of by default, so not any kind of like black people getting up and saying, we need a black homecoming queen, but white people saying, let's use this black girl so we can get at this other these other white people.
Right, and it was very suspicious because immediately after the black homecoming queen election,
and she was on CNN.
You had it was national news. Then 2 weeks later, 1 week later, you had the riot at Ole Miss about Obama's winning the election. Yeah. So I was like, oh, so that whole black homecoming thing wasn't what we thought it was. It wasn't what it appeared to be. It wasn't what it appeared to be.
And University of Mississippi is very good at orchestrating those kinds of more complicated things that happen in a post-civil rights, post-racial kind of moment where we think we're making progress, but what's happening is, whiteness is behind the curtain, like,
So what does that do to our notions and understanding the symbols? Because that makes me think about Pop Joyner saying, in essence, Obama is the Manchurian candidate. So he's handpicked,
programmed.
Right, and so now we're wondering and critiquing, why isn't he talking about race? Well, if he is just merely the symbol to extinguish the sentiment of a revolution, or even more adequate progress, for whatever that means, then how is the symbol now functioning to, I guess, keep the same people? Chuck, tell me some of your thoughts on this. Isn't it functioning to keep the same people who need to be saying something quiet, and it's the invisible hand again?
Obama is a Democrat. Thank you.
Yeah.
Pretty good politician.
Obama is the leader of the Democratic Party. The Democratic Party, a long time ago, stopped really actually, being centrally concerned about the reality of poor people.
Anybody,
right? So, I mean, this is Bill Clinton's party. Right? This is the party that got shifted to the right by the Democratic Leadership Council, and because they were tired of losing to the Republicans, so they became more like the Republicans, right? So, and if we were really careful, if we weren't too terribly starstruck in 2008, we got the signs, right? I mean, if you listen to what Obama was really actually trying to tell you, right, about a whole host of issues, you would see. If you go back and read a lot of the campaign pledges and slogans and a lot of that stuff, you would go back and you'd be like, oh, now that I got the stars out of my eyes, right? Now that I got the pixie dust is off of me, right? I see that these are the policies and ideas of a centrist, mainly of a centrist president, right? This man, at no point in time did Obama say to you, I am stop believing Fox News, right? I mean, at no point in time did he say to you, I'm a hard right, a hard left, severe progressive who is going to come in and redistribute wealth, right? Like Bill Maher said, if Obama's a socialist, he's an awful one.
Yeah.
Right? He is a terrible one, right? The stock market hitting an all-time high. 15 minutes after he got elected, Guantanamo was going to stay open.
The same
right?
people same people in these high-ranking cabinet positions who
Right.
orchestrated the Wall Street
Right.
crisis.
The same people who tanked the economy, who almost blew up the economy of the world, got to keep their jobs. Number of people from Wall Street who went to jail, zero. Right? The drone strikes that are blowing up, elementary schools are flying, and children are flying more now under Obama than they were under Bush. Obama in 4 years deported more undocumented workers, undocumented people than 8 years of Bush. We can go on and on and on and on. So no, there is no unplug from the matrix for a second and understand and realize, right? Understand and realize that this is he wasn't going to be. At no point in time was he going to be Black Jesus, right? At no point in time was that going to happen. And if we thought that,
Or even white Jesus.
or even white Jesus for that matter, right? Any version of Jesus,
he can be both,
right? Or
black
even
and
mulatto,
white.
or mulatto Jesus, right? None of that, right? None of that, right? So high yellow Jesus, whatever, right? At no point in time was that going to happen.
But okay, and so you mentioned the stars and the eyes, and the question is, in essence, I guess you could say historical characters or figures like Barack and King, going back to symbolism, they're necessary. So everyone was so duped, whether it was white or black. It was 8 years of hell. We know that. So anything that the Democrats would have come out with would have beat the Republican Party in 08. Right. And then so also because of this white privilege, and also could call it white guilt. Okay, the privilege. Okay, I'm gonna let a nigga be president. The guilt is I'm gonna let a nigga be president.
Yeah.
And blacks were so happy. So most people don't really know the man's policy, so to speak, or where he stands, but he sounded good, and the symbolism forces people to actually, seems to be that most people are apologetic for him. I hear oftentimes, and the question is about to come, I hear oftentimes from, people are discussing, the conflict, prophet versus politician. Mm-hmm. To me, both of them, I guess is how we would define prophetic or a prophet, but if you look at King and Obama, for the most part, we understood the appeal of both of them to whatever groups it may have been. King's was probably harder and more difficult with his agenda at the time, but Barack, all you needed to be was black at the time, and if he was handpicked, if he's the Manchurian candidate. So the symbolism, like my father was saying, you said at the offset of the show, symbols are necessary. Yeah. We love those, right? We're starved for a symbol. Mm-hmm. Is this what, in essence, has this man going down? Because now, this is why the show was based today. He's gonna be a historical figure, whether we like it or not. Mm-hmm. Now, every president we don't study about. We don't read much about Woodrow Wilson, Martin Van Buren, but we know Kennedy, Lincoln, Washington,
FDR,
LBJ. So, is this a necessary trope, so to speak, in society for these symbols in general? And do you think this prophet versus politician has been confused, at least in the black community, or white as well?
And let's do this. Let's hold that so we can think about it. We're going to take a last break so we can come back with our last segment and then regretfully wrap this wonderful dialogue up. All right, so we'll be back in a second. The pastor and the professor don't play with us.